and we call it the ZWAC show. And each month we do two things. We feature the past and we feature the present. For the past, we have a roster of recycling and zero waste pioneers who have been interviewed for the recycling archives, which I'm going to ask Susan to describe in a moment. And we hear their stories because we learn lessons from those stories. So that's the past part. The future part is we hear about what somebody is doing currently to make a difference in advocacy. Tonight, we're happy to have Ted Obbard, who is from the Alameda County Chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby, which has lots and lots of chapters, but we're going to hear about what they're doing to try to reverse climate change, because goodness knows we need to do it pretty darn quick, as best as we can. So that's our show for tonight. I'd like to start by going back to the past. In previous shows, we featured a single person who has been a recycling pioneer, and we've talked about their stories. But in the backdrop to the recycling archives, every participant had to answer the same questions. I think there's 23 of them. And so tonight we're going to do something different. We're going to pick one of the questions that was asked of everyone, and we're going to highlight the different answers that were received, because one of the interesting things about the project was how all these people answered different things. And many of the questions were answered in similar ways, but in other questions, people had much different experiences that they related. So tonight we're going to focus on the question that talks about, were you ever threatened or intimidated in your work in recycling? And so Susan, if you would take it over, describe a little for us again what the Recycling Archives is, and especially what tonight's focus is going to be.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Recycling has existed for thousands of years. People are always trying to reuse and reincorporate things as much as possible. And even over the past couple hundred years, there were a lot of businesses that were recycling the scraps that were left over in their manufacturing processes. But as far as the kinds of collections that we have now in local governments and all, that mostly started inspired by the 1970 first Earth Day in April 22nd, 1970. And what we've seen over the decades since then is that there really wasn't much effort to collect the kinds of stories about the experiences of the people who started a lot of these programs and worked in different aspects of them. So, and we began to realize that we were losing some of those people and we didn't want to lose their stories. So in the Recycling Archives, we've been going back to a lot of the earlier people working in the field and saying, tell us your stories. And we get just amazing kinds of wonderful stories from them. Tonight, I'm going to talk about a group of answers to the question about threats and dangers. And there's a lot of different kinds of threats and dangers. Some of them are, just outright intimidation or even, more upsetting kinds of things. Some of them are technical problems that were created in order to try to stop a program, or different types of economic issues that happen. I'm going to talk about some of the bullying that happened tonight. So one of the joys of interviewing people who've been in the recycling field for a long time is hearing these stories with just about their delightful ingenuity and how they turn their dreams and ideas into reality. But sometimes the obstacles that face them are of a darker nature, and those really make me angry. So I cheer when those recyclers come up with ingenious responses in those circumstances. But the stories also illustrate injustices and dangers that should never exist, but sometimes, nevertheless, they occur. And here's some of those stories. Most of these are from 3 or 4 decades ago. Rick Anthony tells about when early in his career, he was working for Fresno County in California and got a warning through attempted intimidation. As he tells it, a new guy started working for the national waste hauler that was also our local hauler at that time. So he drove down to Fresno to see us. He wanted to convince the county to sell their permitted landfills to his company. He was wearing his black suit with his black shirt and his black tie. And then he took us out to the parking lot where he showed us these Uzis that he sells from the trunk of his car. I mean, this guy was a licensed Uzi salesman. We kind of giggled nervously, but we really didn't think this was a threat. The only real threat I think I had was when I moved to a job as a county manager in San Diego County. And I got some information from another group of guys about a local hauler who'd been fined several times for price fixing. We didn't know anything about this, but I looked it up and I found it was true. And later I just happened to be talking to one of his vice presidents about that. She said she didn't know about it either. And then she went and told the owner, and the guy had the balls to call me on the phone and tell me to keep my fucking mouth shut. Well, we finally got upset with the games that these guys were playing. They were pushing people around and threatening and being blustery. So we used public records and we reviewed the campaign documents of local politicians to see who was donating money to whom. It turned out that that local hauler was paying 20, 30, 40 people $50 a month to send contributions to the same 3 candidates in every city where he had a franchise. His case finally got to the Political Fair Practices Committee, and he was fined $250,000 for campaign violations. These were the biggest fines ever put on anybody for illegal contributions. He's no longer in business. And that was a message that we sent to San Diego. You can bluff if you want, but there are some people in government still who are ready to make people play fairly. Ken Dunn in Chicago organized a very popular and successful community recycling program in a marginalized neighborhood that still brings the area together after 50 years. He said he's had multiple threats, primarily from representatives and sometimes their workers of the major waste companies that want to take over his business. But Ken is pretty streetwise. And here's one of his stories. Ken says, a guy called me on the phone. He was very inquisitive about what I was doing, where I could go with a truck to make a pickup. But he wouldn't give me his name or phone number or address. And then he said, I know you work late. I can meet you any place on your route with what I need to offload to you. I'd already figured out that this was a repeat of an earlier threat, but it was kind of fishy. So I scheduled to do a Dropbox collection early next day in the village of Oak Park. I said, well, I'll be doing a collection in Oak Park before the city comes alive. I'll be at this address. I think it was on West Madison, at about 5:30 a.m. to meet you. It was a Sunday morning. And he said, okay, I'll meet you there. Actually, I'd given him the address of the parking lot at the Oak Park police station. And 5:30 a.m. was the hour that the shift changed. So there would be lots of police walking around. I was there at 5:30 a.m. for the appointment. And this 4-wheel drive came in with 4 burly guys in muscle shirts inside. As soon as they turned into the parking lot, they stopped. Police were walking everywhere. I acknowledged them with a friendly wave and I walked over to their vehicle and I said, no, we were supposed to meet here to talk, right? And they said, no, we were just passing through. I think we got all that we wanted. They just drove away. Now, Amy Perlmutter took on a threat even more directly. She started out as the first recycling coordinator in a county in New Jersey. She tells about one day when she was helping a city recycling office come up with a recycling plan. So Amy explains, one guy, I think he might have been a city council member, comes into the room to say that rate reform to support recycling is impossible. And I get up and comment, the only reason recycling isn't going to work is because people say it's not going to work. Well, he went off the wall. He pulled the city's recycling coordinator out of the room, and I heard them yelling in the hallway, and then the recycling coordinator came back alone. And at the end of the meeting, he says to me, do you know who that man was? And I said, no, I mean, other than he's some counselor, whatever. So he tells me that the yelling I heard was, does she know who I am? So apparently he was the guy who beats people up for other people, the enforcer. So the recycling coordinator said, you better watch out. And I said, I'm not worried. I don't know why I wasn't worried. I should have been worried. Well, a few years later, Amy changed jobs to become head of San Francisco's recycling program. She pioneered lots of new plans to expand it. And she describes a meeting with a guy from a paper company that has echoes of her New Jersey experience. Amy says, "There's a guy there who gets upset with me. I don't know what I said that pissed him off. I can't remember, but he says to me, 'You better watch out or you're going to be found on the bottom of the bay with concrete shoes.' I looked at this guy at the meeting and said, 'You know, mister, I'm from New Jersey. And I know a lot of people from the garbage industry in New Jersey. And you know what? If I'm found in the bottom of the bay with concrete shoes, you're going to find yourself in the bottom of the bay with bigger ones.' He never bothered me after that." Now, Neil Seldman tells a story about a time about 40 years ago when he was threatened, but then protected in a most charming kind of way. We've told the story before, but I think it's worth repeating. Neil had been at a conference in Indianapolis that was about how to organize to keep garbage incinerators out of your town. As he tells the story, during the conference, I got an urgent call for help from a couple in Ohio, a few hundred miles away. I left immediately and went to Ohio, to what was not even a town, but really a village. This village was a German immigrant community that had kept its ways from the 1900s. Even this couple, my hosts, who were born in the village, were not considered part of the community anymore because they'd moved into the nearby town. I stayed at their house and they filled me in. The village of 400 or so people had been offered a host community fee in exchange for approval to build a garbage incinerator that would bring in garbage from all over the region. I'd been invited to talk to the community about what to do. The next evening, the couple dropped me off at the village school. They were not allowed inside. The school was reopened in the evening for the meeting. About 75 to 100 people showed up, dressed plainly. Most of the women wore head bonnets. They sat down at the tables in the cafeteria. This was an odd fit because they were really too big for the kids' seats. One of the women stood by me and started the meeting. I made a 20-minute presentation on why the incinerator was a bad idea for their community. The woman next to me then pointed to the first person to respond and continued in order of how they were seated. It took at least 2 hours to get to everyone. Each had a chance to ask at least one question, and most did, although some passed. Toward the end of the question period, a man who lived in the community got his turn. He was the businessman brokering the deal for the incinerator people. He did not ask a question. Instead, he announced that he wanted to take me outside and, with a few of his friends standing nearby, beat me up and throw me out of town. Well, in a split second, the woman next to me jumped in front of me and said loudly, "There will be none of that talk here tonight." At the same time, all the women seated near me, around 10 of them, got up and surrounded me. It was like a herd of wildebeests surrounding their young in the face of danger. I never felt safer in my life than when I was defended by a crowd of women wearing aprons and bonnets. And as our last story for tonight, Jan Michael Halls tells about when he worked on a contract with Neil Seldman to get recycling going in the Atlantic City casinos in New Jersey. And he says, that job in Atlantic County was the most amazing thing. Our project there was funded by the state of New Jersey. The state wanted us to work with the casinos. We were supposed to help them get enough recycling going to qualify for their construction permits. The state mandated 25% recycling. A couple of the casinos had been built already, and there were 6 to 7 more waiting for permits. But the first 2 or 3 had not gotten recycling going, so the state said that the county shouldn't give any more building permits to casinos until they showed that they could meet the new 25% state recycling mandate. So Neil and I went to the first group of casinos and taught them how to recycle. Eventually, everybody got their permits, but first, I was offered incentives by the capo for the casino owners in Atlantic County to make sure I got them their construction permits. They were whining and dining me, and it was pretty impressive. But there was an underlying tone of like, hey, anything you want, you can get. And on top of that, here's all this money that you're going to get if you get us that permit. But I refused their offers. I still did the job requested by the state. However, my refusal only engendered more efforts to try to get me to do immoral things. They kept trying to impress me with their power and control in the community. I walked around town with this one guy. I was with him because I needed to have a background on the community. I can't remember his first name, but as he walked around, he had a rolled wad of money in his pocket that he would just pull out and give C notes to some of the people that he met. We met all kinds of people that he knew as we were going through the city. The casino owners wouldn't let me go with the county officials. They had to show me around. They said, "This is our town, you know, screw the government people." And they said, "You want to do stuff here? You're going to do it our way, or you're on the next truck out of here." So it was just very interesting because, in essence, we did get them recycling in spite of all this muscle. Here's a funny story about how that went. The first casino I visited was at Resorts International. The general manager came out to greet me. He looked like Marcus Welby, MD. And right away at the kickoff meeting at Resorts International, I said, "We're here to talk about recycling and see what you can do to recycle more." But he interrupts me and he goes, "Oh, wait a minute, recycle? I can't get people to recycle here, you know? All these employees, they're all lazy unless motivated." And he said, as he pounded his fist into his other hand, "But you can go ahead and check them out and see if you can get them to set something up." So me and my entourage headed over to the first bar area. And I say to the bartender, "I'm here to talk about recycling." But he interrupts me as he raises his hand and says, "Excuse me, sir, I can't do any recycling. Let me explain why." He steered my group to behind the bar. "You see," he said, as he pointed to spots behind the bar, "I've got to take my liquor bottles and put them over here. I've got to keep them organized because of this liquor agreement. And then I got to put my cans over here because I've got to keep track of how many cans I've used. And I keep beer bottles over here too. And so you can see I can't be adding recycling to my workload." My group stared at each other in amazement, and in unison, we all chuckled. He had basically described the whole source separation system that was needed if the hotel was going to recycle its containers. I said, "Sir, you're doing great. Don't do anything different. You're doing fine doing just what you're doing." In this manner, my group toured the hotel and all of the major housekeeping, gaming, and food servicing activities that day. And I'm thinking, why aren't they recycling? Everything is set up for recycling. They've got total control of their employees. They can tell them to do whatever they want, and they're doing it. But nobody does anything after the separation step. They don't do boo. We saw that the maintenance people cleaned out rooms and lockers at the hotel, and they would even sweep poker chips into the trash bound for the dump because they were too afraid to pick anything out of the lockers. So my group is talking about this state of affairs as we head down to the loading docks, our last stop in our site visit. As we are looking at the dumpsters and the compactor at the dock area, out comes a worker with a Gaylord's load of sorted bottles and cans. Mind you, they were all separated. And he dumped everything right into the trash. I was with our market expert at that time, Murray Fox, and Murray is going bananas in a very animated way. And Murray could be quite animated. And he yells to the worker, wait a minute, I can recycle all this stuff. I can recycle all that stuff." And so recycling became an easy thing to do once we figured out why it wasn't happening. We realized what was blocking recycling. While they were doing all the separation upstream, they didn't have the right bins at the loading dock that were needed to preserve the order that their handling protocols were already creating. We had great success with the casinos. We were able to get them their permit because once they set up the bins and got them picked up by recycling businesses like Murray's, they were at 50% recycling, twice what they needed. So Michael Halls didn't fall for these tough guys' threats, and yet when he was left to do what his contract called for, the result not only delivered double the recycling that the state had wanted, but also the permits that the tough guys were trying so hard to threaten him for. So now, not all of the threats that recyclers have told us about have to do with mobsters and muscle guys. There are other kinds of threats and injustices that recyclers have withstood too. And in a future Recycling Archives reading, we'll tell you about some of those as well.
Thank you, Susan, for curating that. So my only question is, out of however many interviews you come through to curate those, I don't know how many that would be, what percentage of those did people report that they'd had actually experienced threats of or intimidation in thwarting their efforts for recycling? Because I know I have.
I'd
Yeah.
like to speak to it too. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Well, I would say, I mean, Deanna and I counted up at least just a dozen that we remembered off top of our heads. And there were a whole lot more because some of them are kind of hidden. You know, somebody tells about his nonprofit organization being stolen right out from under him, and the government didn't do anything about it. Things like that, that he hadn't counted as a threat, but we certainly did. And there's a bunch of other things like that. So I think that, and some people are not willing to talk about him too. But I would say, you know, probably at least half have really powerful stories like some of these. I want to point out too that Amy Perlmutter is here on our Zoom call, and she's who I talked about in the middle of my story. So she can probably tell us more about this too.
And in fact, putting her on the spot, if anybody has a question they want to ask Amy about her experience, as long as she's willing to talk about it, I think that's fair game on this show.
Sorry, Amy, I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
Come on, Amy, let's hear from you.
Oh, well, I would, you know, I think those two were the bigger ones in terms of threats, but in terms of, you know, just like annoying behavior. That's like a whole other chapter, you know, annoying behavior from garbage haulers. But, you know, overall, yeah, I worked in government the first half of my career, and I think that the hauling industry, the private sector, was not really sure what to make of it as government, especially in the early years. And then once they figured out, you know, once we showed we listened and could work with them, you know, well, I'll just say this. So in San Francisco, when we got the curbside recycling program set up, a certain garbage company that handled San Francisco had hired somebody to dig up dirt on me. And the way that I found this out was because the FBI was investigating them and showed up in my office with a letter that this garbage company had written to well, we'll just name names, that NorCal had written to Willie Brown asking Willie to dig up dirt on me. And so, yeah, they were just kicking and screaming going into curbside recycling. And I was really forceful, pushing them to do it. And on the day of the kickoff, the two presidents of, it was Sunset and Golden Gate at the time, came up to me and said, I mean, they didn't know that I knew they'd hired an investigator to dig up dirt on me, but they did come up to me and said, we know we've given you a really hard time and we were wrong. And thank you so much for making us do this. So that was like super satisfying and wonderful. And I was glad, you know, I didn't back down and just kept pushing them.
I remember you ended up in Herb Cain's newspaper column because of that too.
I was in Herb Cain's column because I had actually felt, reading the franchise agreement with the city, I thought that we needed to go out. Well, and this is being recorded, so I should be careful, but oh, I'm not going to be. So at this point in my career. So I thought we needed to go out to bid because to me, the recyclables had commercial value, materials with commercial value were exempted from the franchise agreement. The attorney disagreed with me, and actually two of the attorneys did. And so, you know, I was not looking to get rid of NorCal, despite what some people thought. I just really thought that legally we needed to do this. And I was, so I was outvoted. The contract valued at $10 million was given to Golden Gate and Sunset. And I had a roommate at the time who was a dispatcher for Sunset. And I had gotten permission from the city to have him as a roommate. You know, everything was above board and we were just roommates. But one day I get a call from Herb Cain's office saying, we understand that the reason that Golden Gate and Sunset got or NorCal got a $10 million contract without going to bid is because you were sleeping with an executive of the garbage company. And I was like, no. And I should have just left it at that. But instead I'm like, no, I have a roommate. And so it ended up getting printed. And I still have this column, is that there's no truth to the rumor that Amy Perlmutter is sleeping with an executive of the garbage company. And that's why they've got a $10 million contract without going out to bid. You know, she's just a roommate with somebody there. And it was just horrifying. It was so, you know, like I value my integrity, and to feel like my integrity was being questioned. And I learned that my roommate had been going around implying to people that he had an in with the city because his roommate worked for the recycling program. And it was pretty horrifying. And then on top of it was the fact that I'd wanted us to go out to bid. I was the one voice for going out to bid, and I was outvoted on that. And yeah, then there was one politician who was looking to get rid of NorCal in the city. And I remember at a rate hearing around that time, he just sat next to me and stared at me like I had no right to live. And it turned out, I asked one of the reporters, because other papers had covered this story that I was sleeping with an executive of the garbage company. And I asked one of the reporters who it was, because she called me to apologize. And it turns out what she was apologizing for was that she spelled my name wrong in the story, not that the story was incorrect. And so when I told her the truth, I said, can I ask you if it was this particular person who fed you this story? And to my surprise, she confirmed to me that it was. So, you know, there's fun and games. We all have stories. But I do look, you know, at the time when these things go on, like at the time, you just sort of get through them. And then looking back, it's like, wow, that was pretty intense.
John, could I have a minute?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that to answer your question, John, you asked how many interviews, sort of a ballpark estimate of how many have these stories of intimidation. Having done most of the edits on these stories, I can tell you that out of about 35 to 40 interviews, I'd say 85% or more have stories of intimidation, or it's really the great untold story of recycling. And it goes against the narrative that recycling is just kind of a do-good thing, and we're all in it because of the high values that we have, which is true. But on the other hand, when you have people like that going up against an industry that is diametrically opposed to what you're trying to do, you put yourself in harm's way. And I'm one of the people that has survived that myself. So, and in some cases, it's not just the bad garbage guys, it's also cities that do it. So, you know, it's not limited to just one sector of the economy. It's kind of like this whole clash of civilizations that are going on, where one of us says, we want to save everything and we want to turn it all back into resources. And the other one says, yeah, but if we do that, my livelihood is gone. And so therefore you're public enemy number one, and we can get rid of you.
Well, thanks, Dan. I think that's a good segue to our next section, because we have with us tonight, as I mentioned, Ted Obbard from the Citizens Climate Lobby, the Alameda County Chapter. And, you know, this is a show about zero waste. So you might think, well, why are we having something about climate? And they're very much, they have a lot of similarities. And in zero waste, we talk a lot about different things that could reverse climate change, soil amendments, carbon sequestration, a lot of things. So Ted, I wasn't planning to ask this question, but it's such a great segue.
Okay.
In zero waste, as you've heard, we have the zero waste advocates going up against the moneyed garbage haulers, the wasters against the non-wasters. And in some situations, we've heard the wasters go to great lengths, bad lengths, to intimidate the good guys. Climate change.
Yeah.
Oil and gas industry versus good guys. Is there, do the good guys get threatened and intimidated?
It's interesting. I operate at the local grassroots level, and I think as such, I'm not a big enough fish to be worth intimidating. Certainly the oil and gas industry throws their weight around in the legislature, whether that's federal or state level. And I don't, I'm not privy to what other kinds of methods of influence they use together with persuasion and campaign donations, but who knows? So
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that question, but let's talk about the Citizens Climate Lobby. They're going up against the oil and gas industry. What are
yes.
they trying to do? What is their goal?
So Citizens Climate Lobby has two overarching goals. One of them is to generally build political will for climate solutions. And we operate primarily at the federal level, although in California, there's a movement to build capacity at the state level also. And then the second goal is personal political empowerment. So we are wanting to get citizens, we're big believers in democracy, and that we have a representative government. And so we want to help people find their voice, how to get their voice heard. So those are the big, the two big goals that we have there. If you want, I can talk more about sort of the marquee legislation that we've been pushing for quite a long time, since 2007. That's when the Alameda chapter started, since the organization started. But there are a range of pieces of legislation that we have supported and are supporting.
So I will come back to that, but since you mentioned the chapters, I can see on the website, looks like there's a lot of chapters for the Citizens Climate Lobby, 500 some odd.
Yes.
And you're with the Alameda County Chapter.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So what part do the chapters play in this bigger scheme of things, and are they self-governing or not?
Yeah. So as you noted, the organization is built up of these chapters, pretty much one in every congressional district, since it was built around federal lobbying. And we have about 200,000 people who've signed on as supporters, not all active members of chapters, of course. And the chapters all sort of align under the general principles and values of the overall organization. We're a grassroots, nonpartisan nonprofit. So we don't support individual candidates. We'll support legislation and we'll push for education, but we want to make sure, since we believe that lasting climate action is going to have to ultimately have everyone involved. It's going to have to be durable. It's going to have to be passed by Congress, which requires both sides of the aisle. So we're all of the chapters hold that focus on climate action, on legislation at the federal level, the nonpartisan. But then within that, the individual chapters have room to roam. Like right now, we're leaning into nature-based solutions, carbon sequestration, forestry, et cetera. But how that shows up is going to be different in Oakland, where we might work on urban forestry, than it's going to be in Ohio or a farm state, or in the Central Valley even.
Well, I'm interested in how the Alameda County Chapter bleeds over into the bigger picture, because if you're formed along the congressional lines, the Alameda County caucus in Congress doesn't need a lot of selling on this, I wouldn't think. So what does the Alameda County Chapter do above and beyond the Alameda County caucus? Because Barbara Lee's probably on board.
So yes and no. So the Our marquee legislation is carbon fee and dividend, which is a price on carbon in order to make carbon-based solutions less attractive and help people move over to non-polluting solutions. And then a dividend out on a per capita basis in order to protect people who are on the lower income level. There are a lot of people on the progressive wing who are concerned about anything that's a market-based solution. And so to have gotten Barbara Lee's support for carbon fee and dividend legislation actually was not an obvious thing. And it's been helpful in kind of keeping the party together and around the other solutions that have been proposed, to have progressive advocates for, market-based solutions, or solutions that are really focused on the farm communities. So to have a lot of our asks don't really speak necessarily to what's going on in California District 13. But we've asked her to support that in exchange for other supports coming back the other way.
It sounds like politics. So
It's
you've gotten Barbara Lee's support. So
yes.
now you can, is that support something that you try to build on with other chapters and other congressional districts?
We try to build in multiple directions, right? We're always working on just spreading the word on a grassroots level, right? We want to continue to build support for Representative Lee's climate action, whether it's a carbon fee and dividend, or whether it's a Growing Climate Solutions Act, or the RISE Act, or whatever else, right? And so we want to make sure that if and when she gets a lot of blowback, and you never know when that's coming, that the base of endorsements from businesses and faith leaders and all of that, she's got that in her back pocket. The other direction we build is, as mentioned, over towards related legislation. But more to your question, some of the things we've done are, for example, we supported the Citizens Climate Lobby chapter in West Virginia in the run-up to the Reconciliation Act vote, and they were wanting to put on a faith-based conference about creation care. And so we helped them with some of their graphic design, some of their website support, some of getting the mailing list things, a lot of their back-end stuff. We helped them. It was a great conference. Senator Manchin and Senator Capito both phoned into the conference, and who knows if it made any difference, but Senator Manchin did sign on to the Inflation Reduction Act about a month later. So we're happy about that. We also have supported the chapter in Modesto, which is a red district.
So you mentioned you're nonpartisan, but we have in a couple of weeks a pretty big partisan election coming up nationwide. And I would think there would be some temptation that if you have an organization with chapters matching congressional districts, that you might want to get them involved in this big deal thing. So is CCL involved in this big deal midterm election process?
In a couple of ways, we are definitely have been working to make climate an election issue, right? We want politicians to know that people are voting on the basis of climate. So we've had a push to get people to go to town hall meetings and ask questions about climate, just to raise the awareness of it. Around the Inflation Reduction Act, we did some phone banking from CCL members in California to CCL members in Arizona, in West Virginia, saying, hey, can you talk to your senator about this? In a somewhat similar vein, right now, we are encouraging our members to participate with a group called the Environmental Voter Project. They phone bank to voters who are environmentalists or likely to be environmentalists based on their profiles. They do research to identify sort of what are the tags that you can use to identify environmentalists. And then they identify environmentalists or likely environmentalists who are known to be infrequent or non-voters, which you can get from the voter rolls. And then they have, and so we, a lot of CCL members have been involved in the Environmental Voter Project phone banking into swing states. Now that's nonpartisan. We're just trying to call environmentalists, right? Could be of any party.
Well, that's true. I mean, it's not partisan in a sense. It's not Democrat versus Republican, but surely you could go into any congressional district where there's a close polling election, and you can see the two candidates. And you can see that one of them is probably a little bit better for climate than another, just like as one is a little better for zero waste than another. So do you pick that way?
No, we do not recommend particular candidates. We are assiduous in our, we believe in climate action, and we try to get people who are environmentalists engaged and trust that they can take that last step themselves.
But you don't finish the sentence for them and say, well, we're for the environment and that guy is against the environment and that woman is for it. You don't do that.
We do not.
Okay, that's well, we could talk about why, but I'll move on. This model legislation that you've talked about, which started about when, the advocacy for it?
Probably around 2005.
So it's a long process.
Yes.
Carbon fee and dividend. Can you explain that to us in 2 minutes or less?
Yes. So people use less of things when they cost more. And right now people are allowed to pollute for free. So do they pollute? You betcha. If we force pollution to cost money, people will pollute less. The easiest way to do that is to put a fee on fossil fuels when they come into the economy, at the wellhead or the port or the mouth of the mine. And the Federal Reserve already tracks I think it is 179 companies that bring fossil fuels into the economy and how much they bring in. So it would be easy to levy a fee on that. And you basically could levy a fee, you could just go straight for the social cost of carbon, but that would be quite a step function and very disruptive to the economy. So we recommend starting small and building up over time. And that will then ripple through the economy so that things that are polluting will cost more. That will encourage people and businesses to move to solutions, whether they're transportation or housing or products that pollute less. It'll also send a message to innovators and investors that the market is going to move and it's going to move fast. So it will help with investment in clean solutions. It will help accelerate the build out of clean solutions. And then because things like the cost of gasoline will go up, the money that's collected is rebated on a per capita basis. And that's also, that could be done through the Treasury or through a third party.
So you mentioned the price of gasoline. It's $6.50. And government is bending over backwards to try to make it less for people. They realize that it's painful for people to pay that. It's painful, so it's making it painful for people to pollute. But the political will is not to savor the pain, it's to try to relieve the pain. So where does your model bill fit into that?
Right now, it's a hard sell, and thus our focus on related, things that can reach across the aisle, like nature-based solutions. Certainly it's timely right now just to be making climate a election issue. So I think you're absolutely right that, part of what's painful for us is that if this had been put in place, whatever, in 2009, by now we would, be 50% off of the carbon-based solutions, and the price of gas would be down because the supply and demand would be different. But that's water under the bridge. I think you're quite right that right now this is not going to pass.
So if your bill passed, and I was paying, by the way, I have an electric car. If
And
I was
make sure we get to Neil's question. It's sorry, John. Yes.
we're gonna reserve some question time for others when.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's sort of the format. So if your bill had passed and today I was paying $6.50 a gallon for my car, which I wouldn't, how much am I going to get back out of your rebate program?
It's about, well, let me see. So it's slated to be $10 per ton of CO2, starting at 10 and going up by 10 a year over 20 years. So up to 200. So sorry, your question was if it had started when, like 2005.
How much am I going to get back of my
So
$6?
you'd get back after about, you'll get back, the estimate is that after 10 years, a family of 4 will get back about $5,000 a year or something like that.
So what I get back doesn't depend upon my usage?
No, it does not. And that motivates you. Then you still have the motivation to insulate your house, buy an electric car, right? Use.
I'm going to get the money back anyway, aren't I?
Exactly, right. And you'll pay less into the pot if you use things that don't pollute.
But what I get back doesn't have anything to do with what I paid into the pot, does it?
That's correct. So everybody gets back their $5,000. Every family, let's say a family of 4, everybody gets their $1,250, $1,250 right back. And if you're burning a lot of gas, it's gonna, if you're flying to Europe 5 times a year and you've got a 4,000 square foot house and 5 gas cars, you're going to be putting in more than, as a family of 4, that family of 4 is going to be putting a lot more than $5,000 into the pot, but arguably they should be putting more than $5,000 into the pot. And if your family of 4 lives in an apartment, in the city, and you walk to your job and, you recycle and you don't use much, therefore you're not responsible for much pollution, you really won't be putting much into the pot at all, and you'll still be getting your 5,000 out.
I like the last part. So going back to the $6.50 a gallon that I'm paying now, if your bill was in place and there is these fees being imposed along the supply chain, how much higher would my $6.50 a gallon be, do you think, right now?
It goes up by, it starts at about 10 cents a gallon and it goes up by 10 cents a year for 20 years. So it depends how far in you are.
Okay, but I'm gonna have to pay more because if you're imposing fees on everybody in the supply chain, they're passing them on to me, I would assume.
Yeah, so after 20 years, gasoline would cost $2 more a gallon.
So I have one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over briefly to Doug Brooms because he's our oil and gas expert and my co-chair on this committee, and he's been involved in other legislation that I think he wants to ask you about. But my last question is back to the Alameda County Chapter. We're primarily an East Bay group. What can you tell us we can do to help you, and how can we connect our members to your chapter?
Thanks. So you can connect members to our chapter. If people want to be involved, they could go to, and I'll put it in the chat, our general website, which is cclusa.org, and hit the big, join us button. Or if you want to check out our local chapter, you can go to cclalameda.org, and you'll get to see me and a whole bunch of my friends there jumping up and down. What
would you have to do?
Sorry?
What would you have them do if they joined?
So if the things that we do in the chapter,
send money.
Whatever, that's always helpful. Thanks, Neil. I appreciate that. I'll give you the kickback later. So we do lobbying. So we get research summaries from national about legislation that a lot of chapters are pushing for. We can kind of sort through it and see what we think would be good to push for. So like right now, we're lobbying Barbara Lee for what's known as the RISE Act, which levels the playing field between offshore wind and offshore oil and gas right now, which I could talk more about. So there's lobbying. So we do lobbying. We also go tabling and write letters to the editor, right? Classic grassroots. We, although this is a little bit dormant now, garner endorsements from faith and business leaders. And then we also put on events. So one of the things you could do, which is fun, is on Earth Day, you can come to the David Brower Center in Berkeley and see the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, which is a great film festival every year. A whole selection of short films, about the environment, some funny, some serious. So that's a great way to support, is by attending the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, or if you were part of the chapter, you could help put it on. We also have an event coming up, a carbon pricing event, where we'll have someone from Citizens Climate Lobby talking about carbon pricing, and someone from the Global Carbon Rewards people. And they'll talk about the idea of a carbon coin, which is in the Ministry for the Future, if anyone's read that. So we'll be having a bit of a panel discussion and conversation about how putting a price on carbon could help move us to a cleaner, greener future.
Thank you. So I want to turn over to my co-chair, Doug Burns, for a moment. Doug has been very active in pushing on NICRA's behalf support for California bills that would impact the oil and gas industry's efforts to exploit resources here. And I know he has a couple of questions to you about whether your group is involved in these things or supports these things or not. So Doug, if you would take it over.
Okay, can I just take a moment and let Neil, he's got a question he's been burning his burning to raise. So let me just have Neil interject momentarily.
Sure, Neil. I can't see the hand raised always.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Doug, if you can hear me, please go ahead. My question is a short question, which we could deal with later, and I'm anxious to hear what you say. And I'm raising my hand because I have a pinched nerve and I'm trying to work it out. So disregard my arm sticking up in the air. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, Ted, I really appreciate your splendid overview of the Citizens Climate Project, but I'm wondering, you mentioned there's quite a few chapters throughout the state of California. Yeah. And we've got a lot of bills that have been, promulgated in the state. And I was wondering, are any local chapters that have been involved with climate legislation other than your marquee, carbon tax and dividend bill, federal bill?
So we have a lot of chapters have been involved in other federal bills, but I think you're asking about state level legislation.
State, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So the answer is that, there was some activity What was it, like it must have been like 2017 or so, when there was a re-upping of SB, what was the that set up the cap and trade initially. Anyway, there needed to be a re-upping or something, 745. I can't remember the name. Anyway, there was the California carbon pricing was getting reevaluated, and some people got involved in that. But mostly the answer has been no. There is a movement afoot, both from Citizens Climate Lobby Alameda and from one of the larger chapters in Southern California, to start lobbying at the state level. But we're in the early stages of that. We're basically mapping out sort of who are all the representatives, assembly members, senators, where are they on different pieces of legislation, what legislation is in play, what other organizations could we ally with, and then, what legislation would we want to support. So, I've been involved in California state legislation personally through the Reform Action Center of California, which is the Jewish Reform California lobbying group. And so I know that CCL California has a ways to go before we're going to be weighing in, I bet it, on California legislation. My guess is it'll be at least 6 months before we're, really in the game.
And I guess I'm also wondering, among the different chapters throughout the state, are there any that actually list or, indicate which legislation that they've been supportive of, perchance?
At the state level,
Right, state level again.
I don't know. I know, for example, so starting about, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago, chapters did individually, say, sign on to, the SB1, the support for SB 100 or something like that, right? They would say, okay, CCL as a national organization is not supporting this, but as Citizens Climate Lobby Alameda, we could say, we're going to put our voice behind SB 100 in California. But that's not on our website, and my guess is the other CCL chapters don't have it on their websites either. You'd probably have to ask around to see, what they've been supportive of. We signed on in support of No Coal in Oakland. We've signed on as a chapter in support of a number of local and statewide initiatives. Some of the CARB stuff, the cat cracker rule, we had signed on in support of. But I don't know where you'd get that information other than to talk to people in each of the chapters.
Okay, you got one other question that pertains to the, basically, I presume, or I fashion that the tax is based upon the prospects of oil being used for combustion, ultimately, and fuels and things like that. Well, a lot of the oil is actually being used to formulate for making plastics and other cosmetics and other products other than for combustion. So for that portion, are they exempt from the tax, or just curious?
No. The increased cost of the petroleum would pass on to plastic manufacturers, and I don't think the legislation includes any rebate to plastic manufacturers that I'm aware of.
Well, that's reassuring to know. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So
John?
Just one follow-up from Doug's questions. Ted, NCRA signs on to a lot of support and oppose letters for bills. And as part of that, we align with other groups, one of which is called the Clean Seas Coalition. And I do recognize that on CCL's website, it seems to stress that you don't necessarily participate with other groups. You're kind of focused on the one thing, the key piece of legislation. And so I'm wondering, is there any vehicle by which the Alameda County chapter or other chapters might wish to join NICR on, things that we both believe in Sacramento?
Absolutely. At a chapter level, we are free to sign on and support things. Our leadership kind of came up with some guidelines. Obviously, we want it to be something which is going to, make a significant impact, something which, we is going to help build relationships with groups that we respect and, would want to work with, and something that's not going to cause problems for CCL down the road, which is why we don't endorse particular candidates, right? We want to be able to have, red states and blue states working together. And if we are, if we're only endorsing Democratic candidates, we're never going to get Republicans on board, right? So those are our kind of criteria, is that, makes an impact, good relationship, and not going to cause big blowback. And my guess is that a fair number of things could fit under that. And I'd certainly be interested to hear what you're thinking of. Yep, open to your thoughts.
Great. I think we'll probably take you up on that. And we don't really support or oppose candidates. We're about zero waste. We're not about Democrats or Republicans. But we will tell you who to vote for if you want. Anybody else have questions of Ted? Now that I can.
I would, if it's okay. First of all, Ted, thank you for introducing us and me certainly to your group, and Doug and John, thank you for getting the questions to draw all this information out. So thank you again. And I'm here in DC, so I'm considered a foreigner, but I have a couple of observations and I'll make them. And Ted, please respond, and John and Doug or anyone do the same. One has to do with the fee, which of course is I like, tax things we don't want. And I would say that I'll call this the scenario you lay out is an indirect tax on plastic, but from our point of view, from zero waste, we want to see direct taxes on plastic immediately, and for many reasons other than it's derived from petroleum. I'm sure you could understand that. And my question about the fee, tax the bastards, as they say. I understand the political need to give rebates. On the other hand, to individuals. On the other hand, I love the idea of this type of money coming into the economy to generate more than individual rebates. Oh, I must say that we're paying $4.45, $4.05 a gallon here, so I can commiserate with Californians. And I have no idea why it's so much higher. But I would love to see some part of this capital coming in from these companies going to the Earned Income Tax Credit Program, which is one of the best ways to stimulate the local economy by putting money directly into the hands of people who have jobs at the low end of the economy. And that's proven many, many times over. And the second, this is to aggregate the local capital. I've fresh off a discussion here in the DC area that Michael Schulman put on about the literal revolution in local funding and debt funding and nonprofit funding. I won't go into all the mechanisms. You could look up Michael Schulman, who's a terrific resource. So I was wondering if the money raised could go to other, in your concept, go to other than individuals, to more build community capacity. And the last comment I would make, I'd love people to know that one of the first publications we at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, I'm still on the board, I've retired from my day-to-day job, but we produced the BTU kilowatt counter. And we proposed, and Clinton liked the idea, never got anywhere, that we change, you don't go buy a gallon of gas, you buy 300,000 BTUs. And you start educating everything is related to BTUs, and just throwing out an idea that's 50 years old, but I think is still relevant. And again, thanks for your time. I would appreciate any response.
Sure, sure. The BTU idea is fun. I'm sure it would help with some consciousness raising about, how much we're burning. You could also put, it's been nice to see when I look on some of the travel things now, like, whether it's like, what's the fat Google Maps or Google Flights, they'll tell you how many tons of CO2 you're going to burn if you, take this flight.
Yeah.
And you could do that with gasoline as well, right? Instead of doing gallons, you could put in like, how many pounds of CO2 are you going to end up putting into the atmosphere, right?
In fact, on that point, since we're all anti-incineration fighters as well as zero wasters, one of the great statistics that came out of the late 70s, early 80s from California, from San Diego, they were proposing a 2,000 ton per day mass burn incinerator. And the environmentalists and everyone activists against them, that was equivalent to, like, let's say, I'm making up a number, 150 pounds of SO2 a year. And no one knew what that meant. And some of the smart people I think in the medical profession broke it down to 224,000 cars driving past your house every day. And that got us a lot of anti-incineration votes just by translating it into something that people can relate to.
And yep.
Neil, could you just spend a minute and tell everybody about Montgomery County and closing down that big garbage incinerator?
Sure, tell me how much time I have, because but I'll give myself 5 minutes. It's 9:36. If that's okay, I will take 5 minutes.
Why don't we do this, Neil, before you do?
Yeah, why don't we, exactly. Why don't we conclude the meeting and discussion with Ted, which is of course very germane, and then we can gossip about Montgomery County.
Yeah, let's do that, because I've asked Ted to give up his dinner hour, and
Of course.
I want to make sure everybody who wants to ask him a question gets a chance before we turn him loose.
And there's another part of your question, Neil, which I didn't get to yet, which is could some of the revenue be used not just for a rebate, or instead of for a rebate, to be used for other kinds of ways to accelerate either environmental justice, zero waste,
I would, excuse me, but I would argue infrastructure. For example, if I'm paying $6.50 a gallon and I have to use my car to get to a job, as many people do in California, if there were a subway line or a speedy bus line with the bus lanes, so that money could enhance, can solve the problem, i.e. mass transit, instead of basically saying it's a penalty to drive your car because gas costs so much.
Right.
And that's also an equalizer for low-income people.
Yeah. So there are kind of two answers to the question as to why, given the fact, and I totally agree with you, that there are lots of good things to do with the money, right? Why does Citizens Climate Lobby say, let's do 100% rebate, right? One of them is political, that one of the classic arguments against any new government program from the right is that it grows government, right? You're feeding this massive beast, which just keeps the Leviathan, is getting out of control, right? So, this is a zero government growth, which sort of allows it to walk past one of the classic conservative, concerns. The step back from that, Citizens Climate Lobby's position is that we want to make sure that this doesn't hurt, people at the bottom of the wealth and income spectrum, right? If you rebate 100% of it, it basically, most people who are sort of at the bottom 3 quintiles, 60% and below, do come out ahead. If you rebate like 75% or 70%, I think the bottom 40% still come out ahead. And that's sort of our minimum bar. We want to make sure that the bottom 40% at least are protected. So we could give up some of that in order to go to these other good programs. Part of the reason we like having a rebate is because we think it makes it politically sticky, right? You know, if people are getting a check every month, they're going to be loath to, you know, they're going to start to like it, right? As compared to like the yellow vest protests in France, where they just passed the tax and there was no rebate. And the people who had to, you know, who were at the lower end of the income spectrum were understandably saying, hey, you know, you're saving the world on the backs of the poor. You know, we're not happy about this. So, you know, I expect that when, you know, when it comes time to put a price on carbon, and there are a lot of people now talking about sequencing, right, where you pass something like the Inflation Reduction Act first, where it's all, you know, sort of, it's Christmas and everybody gets a present, right? And then you build up a more and more of the economy to be dependent on the green economy, and you start to shift, you know, the amount of the economy which is in oil and gas, you know, more and more in the green area. Then you get to the point at some point where you can put a price on carbon because you have more political will built up. So, you know, one of the, so that, you know, with this idea of sequencing and our hope that at some point, this very, you know, honestly, I just want to see the problem solved. I think this is a very effective way to do it, but I'm glad to be part of an organization which is supporting lots of different ways to do it, right? Because, you know, who knows what's really going to work, right? You know, the Inflation Reduction Act did a ton of good stuff. None of it included a carbon price. And I'm delighted, you know, I mean, I'm happy that CCL volunteers all over the country were saying, hey, pass this thing, right? Talking to their members of Congress and senators, pushing to get the IRA passed. So I'm not stuck on any one thing. And I do expect that when it comes down to the sausage making of politics, that some of the revenue will get hived off and put towards particular programs. But whether it's public transit or whether it's, you know, job retraining for coal miners or whatever, how much goes where is probably going to be a matter of political power at the moment of passage.
Ed,
Great, very, very thorough. Thank you.
thank you so much for joining us. You're an incredibly eloquent speaker for a Citizens Climate Lobby. I'll paraphrase the movie Casablanca by saying, I think this is the beginning of a long and beautiful friendship. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks.
You're welcome to stay for the rest of it too, but I just wanted to give you leave if you'd like to leave.
Thanks. I am going to take a peek and see how close dinner is, because I do have 2 students in Berkeley High, and that means they're not going to be around much longer. And I
Good
want
luck.
as much of them as I can, right?
Could I have just a second more, John?
Do you want to ask Ted something?
Yeah,
Okay.
I want to bring up the idea of you guys doing paid advertising. And the thought that I have is this: it comes off of my personal experience with running a business whose biggest building is a 30,000 square foot building. We put 265 solar collectors on the roof last year. What happened after that was astounding. Our PG&E bill went from $2,400 a month to $28 a month. Now, there's thousands, tens of thousands of warehouse roofs all over the state of California that could support a similar kind of thing. You'd have decentralized solar feeding into the grid from all sorts of localities all over the place. It would increase the resilience of the whole system tremendously to do that. So it seems to me that one of the best ways to put the information out is to the public and through them to the electeds. But you get to the public through paid advertising, which we do as well. So, you know, we pay to buy the back cover of Bay Nature magazine, and we promote recycling that way. And, it's costly, but it really, really works and we get the message out. And I think you could do a whole lot with that. And maybe people would donate to you based on the idea that you had some sort of fund that was aimed at doing paid advertising to
Great.
highlight these kinds of examples.
Yeah, we have played around with the idea of doing some paid advertising. And yeah, the question always comes sort of like, are we trying to get, are we promoting general climate action? Are we promoting come visit our chapter? Are we promoting, put solar on your roof, right? There's a lot of good things, that can be promoted. And so, sorry, Dan, so you're suggesting that the focus of the advertising would be to promote like a fund for, say it again.
Individual people or businesses doing the right thing and getting rewarded for it, not by a check, but by savings. Which is a very different thing. In other words, your cost structure is affected. You, as a business, you want to bring down your costs if you can.
Yep.
Well, I mean, have it going from PG&E to $2,400 a month
to
$28 a month is quite a shrinkage of cost.
Yeah.
And it happens every month.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just out tabling this past, this past weekend? This past weekend at the Oakland Black Cowboy Association Festival. And, one of the things that we have up at our tabling, which people really liked, was a preview of the Inflation Reduction Act discounts and rebates that are coming down the pike, right? There's a couple that are federal tax credits that are already available, like for solar, and but there's starting in 2023, there are going to be the car discounts and heat pump discounts, etc. And I think you're right. Getting the word out about the savings that are available is a really powerful intervention.
And very hopeful. Hopeful is what we need. Hope around this country right now.
Sounds like the Democratic Party could use your PowerPoint from the tabling. I feel like I need to let you get back to your hungry teenagers.
All right, I'm gonna say thank you very much to all of you. I'm gonna leave you with just one thing in the chat, which is the Eventbrite page for the carbon pricing event that's coming up. I realized I'd forgotten to put that in earlier with the links to the chapter. But yes, John, I look forward to being in touch. And Dan, thanks so much for the offer earlier during the
Cocktail
hour. I will certainly, I'll check in with you guys around the Wild and Scenic Film Festival, see if you'd like to be a sponsor of that. I think, we've got a lot of good groups that sponsor that. It would be fun to have you as a community partner there too. So we'll just throw things at us in terms of letter sign-ons and ways that we can support you.
Great.
Thank you, Ted.
All right, thanks so much.
So moving on with the meeting, the next agenda item I had put in jest on the agenda that Doug was going to do a wrap about the recent legislative session. And I would imagine he hasn't prepared a wrap for us, which I think we would all pay money to see, but I'm not expecting it. So Doug, if it's okay with you and you don't have a wrap, can we cede our portion of the agenda to Neil so we can talk about Montgomery County, Maryland?
That's fine with me. Sure, go right ahead.
You don't want to do a wrap?
Well, just quickly, I'll just say that this legislative session, at the end of the legislative session, there were 26 bills that NICRA supported. And out of that group of 26, the governor signed 23. Now, the only downside, there was one bill in particular, was the Senate Bill 1013, which was brought wine and distilled beverages into the program, but it was besieged by special interests. So we reversed our support position and to request for the governor to veto, but in fact, governor didn't in fact pass that bill. So that's the only blemish in all the otherwise a stellar result in terms of our results for this year.
Good, good, good.
Next year, we'll do that to music, won't we? Okay, so I think we did also promise a possible surprise speaker, so that will be the last item on the agenda. So Neil, if you want to tell us about Montgomery County, Maryland, now's the time.
Okay, it is just, I'm looking at my clock here. It's 9:50. I will take 5 minutes and we could pick this up next week or next month or whatever, because it will take a month or two to reach a conclusion.
Oh.
So Montgomery County, Maryland is the largest jurisdiction in Maryland. It's in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. It has very rich people, it has middle-class people, it has low-income people, it has homeless people. It is a definite cross-section of the United States. In 30 years ago, the citizens voted in 2 people pledging to kill the incinerator, proposed incinerator. They won, they turned their vote around. And so they built this incinerator. As it was about to be closed, Mark Elrich, I'll just call him the county exec, won 4 years ago on a platform to shut it down. And the day before this unscrupulous politician left office, he gave the incinerator another 5-year contract, so we're still fighting it. The DEP, the people who run the incinerator, love it. They will die by it. They have made my estimation, and I can actually show you data, because this is a 5-year odyssey, legacy with the citizens. In any case, we are now working for the county executive. He just won his election by 35 votes. 4 years ago, he won by 75 votes. So we're hoping we get the job done this time. So we were tasked, because he didn't think his existing people could give him good information on what's worthwhile and what's not. And we put together a consulting team, and we're on a contract. It's my last project, active project for the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And I gathered a team of Dan Knapp on logistics, Nora Goldstein and Craig Coker on composting and anaerobic digestion, Mike Ewall on overall everything, Ruth Abbey, Rick Anthony, and Gary Liss on recycling, composting, and technology. And we put together a plan on how they could use either rail haul or truck to certified landfills that are not in violation of civil rights laws, and landfills that do not threaten majority minority communities. And there are RFPs going out and all of that. There are complications, as you can well imagine. But the bottom line is, this is the second attempt in 3 years of putting together a zero waste plan in hopes and anticipation of shutting an incinerator down. The first was Baltimore, where this same team of people, before I go any further, team of people, there are a heroic number of men and women, mostly women, who have been working on this for years without a dime. They represent Clean Water Action, they represent the Sierra Club, they represent themselves. They're lawyers, they're very skilled people who live in Montgomery County. We learned everything from them, although I've been involved since the first fight. But in any case, they are a review committee, a citizens review committee. They are looking over our shoulders. They are at our meetings. They're quite a team. And I have I have these adjectives: wonderful, committed, smart, and cooperative, all of the above. So we have been ready, our team has been ready to present. I have 1 more minute. We have ready to present for the last month at least, but As you can imagine, this county executive just won. There were 3 recounts. If you win by 35 votes, you can imagine the tension. So it took him quite a while after the election in September to get to us. And we are talking to him now. However, we are still not on his appointment schedule. And the schedule is we're going to present our plan. He's going to say what this, you know, how it goes. Our experts will be there. The citizens will be there, 3 or 4 of them. And we will then modify our plan. And we have hurdles, which I can't go into because there are technologies that anaerobic digestion that are not fully understood. And you can't just big one build anaerobic digester. There's a logic to it, and small scale is just as efficient as big scale. So why go big scale, etc. And there are lots of controversies. Is it feasible to get methane from your organic waste, turn it into hydrogen, and then run your fleets on it? Who knows? It's not, no one's doing it yet, but several plants are under construction. So there's a lot of give and take. And do you use mixed waste composting to do away with source separation? Then of course, the zero wasters say absolutely not. And so is there a role? We are working through this and we have answers, and we will let you know, because once we present it to the city, county commission, county executive, it will then be distributed to the formal county solid waste management advisors, to this county council, which will be a brand new county council because of the November elections that's coming up. So it's a very exciting time. I'm putting a lot of time into it, and I absolutely love it because the questions come up and I have 6 experts. I could call Dan Knapp anytime and he's getting paid to answer my questions. I love it. And I'm getting paid to ask the questions. So we're having a lot of fun, and we hope that we can succeed in Montgomery County, where we have yet to succeed in Baltimore, although we're trying the same strategy. And I would invite, don't invite me, but there are 2 people, Greg and Shoshanda from Baltimore, who would be a terrific subject for a half hour for you guys to learn what's going on in Baltimore. We certainly haven't given up, but we think we're closer in Montgomery County to use zero waste to kill an existing incinerator. And thank you for this time. Dan, please add from your perspective.
Well, only to say, Neil, you've been wonderful as a convener of this group. And
Thank you.
You are really an expert at drawing people out and getting the best ideas out. And one of the big things that I took away from it is Craig Coker.
Yeah.
Those of you who've never heard of him, and it's probably most of the people on this call, he's a genuine compost expert. And we're about to have an interview from him that Neil's going to do.
For the archives.
The archives, yeah. He's a real serious expert on compost siting problems.
And anaerobic digestion.
Yeah, so.
And we chose him, one, because he's an old friend and we know how reliable he is, but he had been the consultant to Montgomery County on several other occasions, and they're very satisfied with him. So if we get him to be on the team to tell him to shut the incinerator down, it might have more of an impact.
Another person on the team is Nora Goldstein.
Yes. Biocycle.
Well, Neil,
And for those of you on the West Coast who don't know Mike Ewall, Ewall, he is quite talented, and he's working on he's working on just about every aspect of the project, along with the Zero Waste USA team, which I mentioned.
And Ruth Abbey.
Yes, Ruth is the chief investigator, I will say. I'm the coordinator. She's the chief investigator.
well, Neil, thank you for bringing that up tonight. I mean, it's good. It's a good reminder that incinerators are kind of like polio. We haven't quite completely eradicated them in this country.
I like the analogy.
So I would imagine that in our next show, we could have a little bit of an update about what's going on with that. But I think for tonight, that's the end of the show. We do this the second Tuesday of every month. 5:30. I'm not sure what next month's show will be about. We will have something from the archives and something cool going on for the present. But for tonight, that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, John.